I'm Ellen of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy, and Liz, you'll see me mention Liz a few times throughout today. She is the client specialist of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy, and she really helps clients get all the things together that they need to apply for this grant. So she has now a really great base of what it takes to get an application off the ground as well. Okay, so let me get my slides up. Great. So this is the 2023 edition of Writing a High Scoring Application for the VAPG. It is including updates to 2023, even though the RFP has not been officially announced. I am Ellen Raleigh of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy, and in this hour, we're going to be talking about the value-added producer grant and how it can help farms grow their value-added ventures. So we're going to cover today an intro, general eligibility, overview of how the grant works, some real-world examples of how my clients have used funding to grow their farm brands. I find those really helpful in getting your gears turning of how this grant actually can look in real life. The phased approach that I use for writing grant proposals that get funded, and my top advice for how to approach the application. So it's one thing to know whether or not you're eligible. That's super important, of course, but then it's a second thing of knowing how to actually get funded and what reviewers are looking for in applications that get funded. And that is the meat of this, because it's really what I'm passionate about and what I think moves the needle in terms of actually getting funded. So we're going to go over that general eligibility, but it's not the bulk. There's, so much fine print on things that we have a ton of resources. The emails have given you some links to just straight up eligibility webinars that I've done with partners like CAF. And then there's also on our resources page on our website, there's further resources that can help you really think through fine-tooth eligibility questions. And of course, at the end, there's going to be time for Q&A. So we're talking about the VAPG. I'm going to say that a bunch. That means the Value Added Producer Grant, and it is released by the USDA RD, which is the United States Department of Agriculture Rural Development. So it's one subsection of the USDA that actually is the ones who decide which grants get funded and then manage the grants once they are. The way that this application works is you're actually submitting it to your state office of the USDA RD. They are the first ones to review it, to score it. They send those scores to the national office, who reviews them, make sure there's nothing, out of line, but for the most part, it's the score of the state that stays. Once everything's scored, they just basically go down the list and they give out money until they stop having money. So the higher you score, the more likely you are to get included in that pot of funding. So again, a lot of today is going to be talking about how to actually approach the application so that you have a high enough score to get funded. A little bit about me, I'll keep it brief. I'm the founder of Ellen Raleigh Creative and Strategy based in Petaluma, California. I first got interested in value-added farming actually in college because I traveled abroad to Thailand and had the opportunity to live with rice farmers and become really close with some families of rice farmers. And the rice farmers that I was living with, they were certified organic and they own their own rice mill. And over time, getting really more into understanding the international food trade and just the food scene in Thailand, seeing the way that having that control over their product and over their sales, how different those farmers' lives were than farmers who were just selling to middlemen and who didn't have that control over their final product and the final sale of that product. And that's really what started me to get really excited about what I didn't even know at the time, the term value added. And when I returned back to the US, I ended up doing a lot of volunteering and working at urban ag farms in San Francisco, which led through the farmers market to a job at an olive oil ranch in Petaluma. And within about 2 years, they wanted to launch a jam line. There was about 500 fruit trees of varying, all sorts of heirloom varieties of different fruits. And I very naively said I could do it, not really knowing what it takes to make thousands of jars of jam, but learned along the way. And through that experience, ended up also doing product development on their beauty line. They had an olive oil beauty line. And when I left that job in 2016, I think it was, just, the farming community, it's small, and people started to approach me to help them do various things. And one of them was write this value-added producer grant. Those first 2 grants that I wrote for farmers the year after leaving my full-time ranch job, both got funded. And so it's just become more and more a part of my business that each year I write these grants. And last year we ended up writing 6 one-on-one grants, and having 5 folks in our mentorship, which is a guided approach to writing the grant. Through all of that, we've helped secure over $1 million in grant funding to farms in now 8 states, which is really wonderful. And I'm super passionate about products, being quality products and actually getting out there. Products that I've worked on have been featured in all sorts of places like Oprah Magazine, Food and Wine Magazine, things that are supposed to be, very impressive. But to me, the thing that really matters is how that grant funding allowed the farm to increase their reach, increase their revenue, and create a product line that worked sustainably within their farm. So we've worked with all sorts of fun farmers in that time. And this is important to me because I think, especially when you're talking about grants, if you're smaller or larger, you might think it's not the right program for you. I get a lot of questions of like, well, I'm this, is this right for me? So to give you an understanding, we've worked with farmers that started out with less than $10,000 in sales when we were working with them, to over $1 million in sales. Year 2 of farming to multi-generational family farms, selling through farmers markets, farm stands, CSAs, local stores, groceries, and as an ingredient into food service, processing on a farm or working with co-packers, from selling crushed tomatoes to apple cider caramels to dried rose petals to grass-fed hot dogs, on and on. You can see organic coleslaw mix, organic grapefruits. It really is a program that can fit a large range of businesses, business structures, and products. Okay, so that gets me to my first tip, which is it's only value added if it adds value. So I'm going to start us off right away with an example, because I think they really help us root in understanding what this program is and if it's right for you. So Oya Organic Farm is one of my clients. We worked on 2 separate value-added producer grants together that they've received both over years. They're in Hollister, California. They are a diversified veggie farm. So they grow everything you could think of because they have a CSA. So they grow the onions and the tomatoes and the flowers and the squashes and the eggplants and all of the things. When we're writing a value-added producer grant, we focused, because it is a commodity specific grant. So we focused on their tomatoes one year, and we also focused on their peppers, their tomatillos actually specifically, another year. And what they were struggling with was they were a small CSA, and over the winter, even though it's California and you can grow quite a number of things here, there's not as much variety. So each year it felt to them like, they would have more CSA members, and then over the winter when the variety was lower, they'd lose a lot of people. And then in the spring, they'd have to work to kind of regain the people they had lost. And it never really felt like they were growing beyond that set point that every year was dipping and coming back and dipping and coming back. At the same time, they grow crops that they can't sell all of. You know, tomatoes have blossom end drop. Tomatoes have weird shapes or sizes that you can't bring it to market and sell it. So they were having an amount of crop that they were just losing any revenue from. So they were making some products already in-house through a cottage food operation in California. And when we dug into the numbers there and saw how much it was actually costing them to make those products on such a small scale, and how much they were selling them for, and therefore how much money they were making, it really was like, well, it's going to be hard to sell this as an idea because the margins are so small. But then when we started looking at, okay, what if we move this to a small co-packer, a small local co-packer? Now, all of a sudden, their cost actually really went down. They were able to process more. So they were able to use more of that produce that was being lost in the field. And what the products allowed for them to do was to bridge the gap in their CSA and hold on to customers to actually grow their CSA year over year. So what did the grant pay for? So design fees, I meant to edit that because it's a little misleading. Design fees are a little complicated and specific on what kind of design it can be. Let's call them layout fees. Like, they already had a brand. They weren't starting nowhere with design. They just needed that brand to be laid out for all the different really awesome professionalized labels that you saw on the last slide. Co-packer fees, they built out an online CSA portal, branded CSA boxes, social media ads, a mailer campaign, and a salary for a CSA manager are some of the expenses that got covered by the grant. And as Marcia says, before working with Ellen to secure a value-added producer grant from the USDA, we had tomatoes rotting in the field. Every season I would think about preserving them, but I didn't have the time to take on the work myself. Now that we have the grant, I'm making our value-added product line a reality and something we are proud of. So that's an example for you of a need, that there was like a need there, and a clear way of using value-added producer grant funds to achieve increasing their customer base, increasing their revenue. But it has to be, it has to actually add that value. So when we looked at what they were doing business as usual, it wasn't really adding enough profit, but what we did was find a way for it to be a sustainable program, and then it's something that is eligible. So let's talk more about eligibility, some general eligibility and how the grant works. So like I said, there are a lot we did do with CAF, a 3-part webinar that each part was an hour and a half that dove into a lot of details about eligibility. That is obviously not feasible here in the time we have. So I'm going to go over kind of the broad strokes of understanding if this grant is right for you. So the first thing is it has to be value added. It's all for value added products. But value added has a much broader range. It has a much bigger definition than I typically think of people using that word. So typically when I hear that word, people mean this first bullet point, change in physical state. So that's when you're taking a tomato, you're turning it into a sauce. However, in this grant, there is even more ways that they describe value added. It can also be that the way it's produced enhances its value. This is true, for example, with organic tomatoes. You produce a tomato as organic instead of conventional. Now it has more value on the marketplace. People are willing to pay more for it than a conventional tomato. Other examples of this include free range, grass-fed. It's usually things like that, things that are certain types of certifications that fetch a higher price in the marketplace. Another one is physical segregation. This one is that you're segregating the crop or the production of the actual product in a way that enhances its value. So think about gluten-free oats. Instead of interplanting with wheat, you have oats separately. Now you can sell them as gluten-free and people pay more for that. Farm or ranch-based renewable energy. The biggest example I hear about this is something like walnut shells being used for biodiesel, and then locally produced. So anything that's being sold as locally produced, it's, it can just be the produce. It doesn't have to be what we would consider a product, is eligible. However, that is only for edible products. You can't apply for the locally produced if it is not an eligible product. Or sorry, if it is not an edible product. Liz, can you give me a thumbs up that you can still hear me? Because my iPod, okay, cool. It sounded like my ear pods went out. Great. Let me re-go to this. The second thing is it's for farmers. So there are all different classifications of business types that can apply for this grant. I have them listed here. The main takeaway here is that owners have to be part of the day-to-day operations of the farm and the value-added venture. This is not a grant for people who own a farm and really are investors that invest in a farm. And so the owners are all, not there on a day-to-day level, part of the decision-making, part of the actual farm operations. And those farmers also have to meet some requirements. The farms have to meet some requirements. So a big one is you must own 50% or more of the raw commodity in the grant. The grant is commodity specific and then product specific. So you're taking tomatoes and you're making tomato sauce, or you're taking tomatoes and you're selling them as organic tomatoes. In that case of the tomato sauce, you don't have to grow 50% of all the ingredients of the tomato sauce, but you do have to grow, if you're applying for tomatoes, you do have to own and grow 50% of the tomatoes that go into that sauce. It must expand your customer base. So this is not something for just business as usual. You have to have an actual plan for how you're going to expand your customer base with the project, and also how you're going to increase your revenue. And you must be able to attest to things like that you have no federal delinquency on taxes. There's a bunch of those just eligibility requirements that are pretty boilerplate for any grants that you're getting through the government. The grant, there's two types of grants. So there are planning grants and working capital grants. Planning grants really go towards feasibility studies, business plans, other things that are in the planning phase of either planning a new venture or planning on scaling into, I'm working with someone now, for example, that they are a successful business, but now they're like, okay, which sales channel, we want to get to the next level of growth, which sales channel should we focus on? They went for a planning grant because that's going to help offset the cost of working with the professionals who help them determine the answer to that question. Working capital really is more about operating expenses and covering expenses of your cost of goods. It's doing you're actually in production, and that's what you're funding. The project can run up to 3 years, and there is a one-to-one match. So it's a matching grant. You do have to, if you request $49,000 from the government, you have to have $49,000 worth of value to match that. The thing that's great about this is that your portion can come from a combination of cash, value of the raw commodity that you're using throughout the project, and the value of the owner's time. Typically, that's the person that would be on this webinar. So I like to say you, but it's actually the owner's time, which can only be up to 25% of the total budget. And then there's also, you can have different third-party in-kind contributions. So the way I like to think about it, it's like getting $2 every time you spend $1, because you end up having at least 50% of your half usually is covered with some sort of in-kind. So you're typically putting in 25% of the total budget or less in actual cash. 2 tiers of requirements. So under $50,000 ask. So under $50,000 ask, that would be, say you're asking for $49,000. That means that it is a, let's see if I can do the math, a $98,000 project, because it's half and half. So under that $50,000 ask, that's the ask, that just the money you're asking for the government, there's no feasibility study or business plan or marketing plan required. Above that 50,000, depending on the type of grant that you're writing, you do have those requirements. And the best resource for that, with CAF this year, we put together a flow chart so you could understand if you're going to need a feasibility study or business plan, and that can be found on our website in our resources tab, which Liz can stick into the chat. If you have more questions on that, it's a really helpful tool. And of course, with all grants, there are eligible and ineligible expenses. The biggest ineligible expenses, these are the ones that people ask me about all the time, and then I have to let them down and say, no, that's not part of this grant. It does not cover the cost of the actual farming. So in the case of the tomato sauce, it does not cover the cost of the seeds or the water or the labor in the field or the harvesting. It covers everything from once it's harvested on. So if you're processing it in-house, it would be, the washing, the processing, the packaging, the marketing, the sales. It's all of that part. Events, if you want to do some sort of marketing event, like we're going to do this event at the farm and then everyone will buy stuff at our farm stand. They don't like covering stuff like that because the causality is pretty suspect, is like, did that lead to the sale or not? Swag is not something, just logoed stuff. This is not, because it's not for your farm as a general farm, it's for this product that you're making. And equipment. So some small equipment purchases are okay, but it's not a large equipment grant. So I wanted to take 3 minutes here and let everyone pull out a piece of paper. It does look like a lot of folks are sitting at a desk, which is awesome. And these are the 6 budgets of eligible expenses. So you can see administrative, processing and production, distribution, marketing and promotions, general operating, utilities, and staff. So I want to leave 3 minutes to kind of lead you through the process of brainstorming some expenses in your operation that you feel like could get covered under these categories. So just take out a piece of paper. I'm going to leave you with some time. The chat box is open. So this is a great time as you're looking through these. If you have some questions about what about this cost? What about that cost? You can stick those in the chat right now. And I will be quiet so that you can think through these categories and see what could be possible for your grant. I'll look back at this one. So an example, for example, marketing promotions, we have under here signage, advertising your product. It also could be mailers going around to specific neighborhoods that you deliver your CSA, inviting them to join the CSA. It could be signage for the farmers market. It could be signage for your farm stand, helping people get to your farm stand. It could be, what are some other marketing things we've done? All sorts of like point of sale material. I find a lot of times farmers struggle sometimes with that part of like, okay, we made the product. Now, how do we educate the customer enough about A, that it exists, and why it's different than other products so that they're actually enticed to buy it? So all of those kinds of being in advertising, in some local magazines, radio ads, one person did, because that was really a good way of advertising in his local area. Okay, we didn't get any questions coming in, so I'm going to keep it going. And if you come up with others as I continue on, just stick them in the chat at any time and we'll get to them at the end. So one question that comes up a lot is people ask me, once I go over that part, okay, oh, I was hoping to get a big, I was hoping to build out a commercial kitchen with this grant. That's a big one. That's a lot of cost, but let's use a different example. Like I was hoping to get a certain type of stand-up mixer with this grant that costs, $10,000. And now I know that's not an eligible purchase. I guess this isn't the right grant for me. I do like to challenge that notion just a little bit. So if that's you, I would just offer that often what I find when I work with people is we can think about what are the things this grant is going to cover, and does that open up cash for you to be able to buy the thing that's ineligible that you've been wanting to purchase. So for example, like I said, this processing and staff is part of this grant. So if all of a sudden, $20,000 a year of you paying your staff to make the product is now being covered by grant funds, do you have that $10,000 to buy the mixer yourself? That's a way to think about this grant in the larger scheme of your business, rather than just looking for, okay, what's going to pay for that one thing? Because sometimes what you'll find is like not, each grant has like one thing off of why it's not the perfect fit, but there's a way to kind of piece these things together to make it work for your farm. The other thing is that you can also use your application to apply for additional loans. That happened with one of our mentees last year. She got a $249,000 grant for her pig operation, her sustainable meat operation. And she also used the application that she prepared in the mentorship to apply and receive an FSA loan. So that's another option, is saying, okay, what can I get covered by this grant? What else do I need? And now I kind of have proof of concept to these lenders to be able to get the money. A few 2023 specifics. A big one is that applications with some cash will get more points this year. So that was true since I started working on this grant, but then they dropped that requirement for COVID, and it was no longer, you weren't getting more points for having some cash. And it looks like this year that it will be awarded more points to have some cash. So again, you don't have to cover the full amount of what you're asking for in cash. It's that combination of cash, the value of the commodity, your own value of the owner's time, and the third party in kind, but having some amount of cash there basically just helps reviewers see that it kind of shows that you have more skin in the game in some way, and gives them a little more trust that you're going to follow through on the project and that you're going to be able to actually commit and do what you're saying you're going to do in the grant proposal. And like I said, higher points equal funded applications. So it's really important to understand the scoring of the application and then write your application in order to get the most points possible from each section. There's a lot more eligibility resources on our resources page of our newsletter, of our website. That's that second link there, including the CAF series I've mentioned a few times. The second video in particular is really just about eligibility. So if you have more questions about that, that's a great resource for you. Another one is our Instagram page. I try to post often about projects that have been funded, and that's I find a really great way for other farmers to envision what this program could be for their own farm. So if you want to see other examples of funded projects, you can go to our Instagram page at Raleigh Creative Strategy. So let's talk about actually writing the application. This is my favorite topic. So the first year that I wrote this grant, the first 2 years that I wrote this grant, so the first year I actually was traveling because, like I said, I had left my full-time job, and then some farmers asked me to write this for them. So I had said yes to some friends who were traveling in Spain, and I thought, oh, this is going to be so romantic. I'm going to be like traveling around Spain and then writing a grant, so I have some like income coming in. I've done like really bad things for the image of Americans abroad, because the days leading up to this grant being due, I stayed in this really cute B&B apartment kind of thing in Barcelona, and I was up until like 3 a.m. every night, just going out to the little kitchen to make more espresso. And the two men who owned it, they just were like, Americans work a lot, don't they? They kept saying that to me, because I'd be up till 3 a.m. and then back up at like 7, and I looked like a mess, and it was terrible. So I'm really passionate about this, because now I write 6 of them. So it's been a process of figuring out, okay, how do you actually approach this grant so that it gets funded and so that it's actually sustainable and possible to get the writing done. It's not a small task. It is really like writing a whole business plan, which is how I tell people to think about it. It's almost like you're writing a business plan to get a loan from a bank. You're trying to show reviewers of the USDA why they should invest in your venture. So the first phase is the most important, and that's the plan phase. And the objective here is to define a project worth funding. And that includes understanding your cost of goods. The projects that get funded show that there is an added value component. So just because you're turning a tomato into a tomato sauce doesn't mean that you're actually adding value. You could be doing that and losing money every time you sell the tomato sauce. For this program, you have to show what your cost of goods is so that you can show that what you're doing is actually adding value to the raw commodity. There's also sales analysis that has to happen, market research, and sales projections. I'm going to give you another example that really helps elucidate this plan phase. So Little Apple Treats is another client of mine. We've now gotten them 3 value-added producer grants. Basically, what both Little Apple Treats and Oya Organic Farms has done is sticking with that simplified application that you can apply for less than the $50,000, and using it really strategically over time to grow incrementally, rather than doing a larger grant that sometimes for small farms is honestly really hard to manage an influx of cash like that. So let me go back to this example. So Little Apple Treats is in Sebastopol, California. They are on this amazing heirloom orchard that wasn't really why they moved to the place. They moved there to start a nursery, but there were these trees and they were producing apples. So one year they decided to make vinegar from the apples, and people loved it at the farmers market where they were selling their nursery products. And so then Joanne, the wife of the husband-wife team, she's an amazing baker, and she developed these caramels that, instead of using corn syrup, use boiled down apple cider, apple juice. They had a great following at the farmers market. They were at the Ferry Building Farmers Market, which is like the big farmers market in San Francisco. People loved the product. When they would sample it, people would buy it. And they were in a few local stores, but in the stores, they kind of weren't seeing the sales they wanted to see. It was in the stores, buyers would only buy in one variety, and sales were kind of slow. And that's where they came to me. Like that was their stage when they came to me. Okay, we want to grow into local grocery, but something's not working. So when we dug in, we really looked a lot at their packaging and their cost of goods. So when we dove into their cost of goods, what we realized was they were using this packaging because what you can do with this packaging, all the bases are the same. So you can run a larger run of those bases and then just pay for different, the sleeves that go on to the base. So it's an easier way to get packaging when you're working with small minimums and for it to still be somewhat affordable. But what we realized is the labor that went into constructing all those bases and then slipping on the sleeve was actually a really high cost and eating up their margin. And in wholesale, which is what they were trying to grow into, they had very small margins and in some cases negative margins. And so that became the thing to work on and to fix, because if they were going to move more into grocery, they needed something that was going to be attractive to buyers, but also financially sustainable to their farm. The other thing we realized was that for buyers, these look like the same product, where in this picture, that's actually 3 different flavors of product. So buyers were only really buying in one because they didn't really want to line up 3 of something that looks exactly the same. So there was also a reason to change the packaging because of how it was limiting the buyers purchasing the product. And here was the result. So you can see this new packaging that we worked on is much more giftable, really easy to see that it's all different products. There's much more story on the back explaining who the farm is, having information that will help sell the product on the shelf. I find often with farmers, you have a great selling product at the farmer's market because you're there to lead people through what the product is, that they should try it. It's so much that relationship is what people are responding to. Then when you move into wholesale, you have to have the packaging kind of act as that stand-in and create that same type of relationship. This packaging, the great thing about it is it looks great. And because it brought down that labor cost, these are each individual boxes. All they have to do is open the box, slip in the caramels, close the box. There's no constructing a base. So it actually brought down their cost of goods and made their products have a better margin on wholesale so that they could go that route. The thing that was holding them back, you might say, well, why didn't they just do that? Like, what does the value-added producer grant have to do with it? To be able to afford this type of packaging means higher minimums, means having that first upfront, pile is the word that's coming to me of cash. It's kind of a crude way of saying it, but that first investment in your packaging to do that first run where you're getting 3,000 each of 5 boxes. Most small farms, most medium farms that I've seen do not have that cash laying around in a bank account. And that's where the value-added producer grant comes in, was helping them do that first run. Now we have better margins. Now they have more profit. Now when it comes time to reorder, they do have the cash to reorder. And things that the grant covered, the packaging purchases, the layout of the design, other ingredient costs that go into the caramels, sell sheet design, professional photography that went on their website. It really just brought their brand to a different level. And you can see they ended up in Martha Stewart Living, and they have just really, every year, their brand is getting more and more well-known. Joanne said the USDA value-added packaging grant that Ellen got for us was critical in improving our branding, leading to a huge jump in sales and the ability to be picked up by larger accounts such as Italy, Oliver's, and Byrate's markets. So that was really the goal, was to get into that local grocery, and we were able to do it. So that's the importance. It's a long example, but that's the importance of that plan phase. What we went into it with, if we had written a grant about just taking this product and selling it into grocery, we wouldn't have gotten the grant, because they would have seen, well, your margins are really low. Like, the sales aren't going that well so far. So why do we believe that the sales are going to do better if we help fund this? You know, it's that plan phase where you're digging into all of these things to make sure you're constructing a project that is profitable for your farm, that's going to grow your customer base and going to grow your revenue. Those are the three key things. Then the next phase is collecting. So you collect budget quotes and stellar letters of commitment to strengthen your application. Then you go into budgeting after that, because once you have quotes to understand how much different things will cost that you want to do, then you create an eligible budget that's appropriately balanced and won't limit you. So you want to think about throughout the budget in real life, how do I set it up so that I'm always having enough cash flow to spend the money before I get reimbursed, because it's a reimbursement grant. So you have to spend the money and then you get reimbursed for the half or for the portions that you've said the grant is going to pay for. Then you write it. So that is one of my biggest pieces of advice, is the thing people want to do the most when they get the application, the toolkit in their hand, is to write. But that is actually the thing we do almost last, because if you start with writing, you're going to have to rewrite and rewrite. It's a huge time-saving tip. It's completely changed my life, is that you do the writing after everything else. And it's really important to write a compelling narrative that scores well. And then you submit. So you complete the application with all the requirements and you submit it by the due date. Start early and set aside the time needed. So mentees in our mentorship, I tell them to set aside, and it does take them about 80 to 120 hours to put together an application. So it's not a small, if you already have a business plan, if you already have it kind of depends on where your numbers, like how much info you have already to draw from, but it's not a small endeavor. It really is a serious one. A few pieces of top advice. I'm going to start to go quickly so that we have time for a question and answer. In the plan phase, narrow down your project to 1 to 2 commodities and 1 to 2 products max. So I talked about Oya Organics. People who have diversified veggie farms, you are told this grant can be awesome for your operation, but you don't want to apply for all of your crops and all of your products, because it just looks too bifurcated, and it's not, it reads as like overly complicated. Anything you do to promote one product is going to promote your farm as a whole. So just focus your application, and also have some amount of relevant sales data. So if you aren't selling the product yet, so it's best to have at least 2 months, 3 months of sales data. If that's not true for you, then I'd say if there is a way for you to invest in a test run, do that and get a few months of sales data. Or resell a similar product. If you want to make a apple vinegar, see if you can source a local apple vinegar and just do a test run of reselling that product to have some sales data. Or another way is if you sell a similar product, you can use maybe that sales data. So for example, with that apple cider vinegar, maybe you already sell olive oil and you can use that as comparison sales. In the collect phase, my top 2 pieces of advice. So I basically went through, in the mentorship, we give like tons of tips, and I'm trying to just like give you like the top ones for this hour. So in collect, third-party research from credible sources is critical to a well-scoring application. They ask for it specifically. You have to do market research. So do that research and make sure it's credible research, not just some random website that you Googled and found. Collect letters of commitment, not general letters of support. The letters of commitment have to be from people saying they're going to commit to buying product, they're going to commit to marketing for you. They have to have actual commitment, not just we think this is a great product. And then in budget, make sure to include enough people power to pull off your project. Don't underestimate the time it's going to take to actually do this, and create a budget that will work with your cash flow in real life, which I kind of covered already. In the write phase, start writing lasts, and don't shy away from presenting yourself in the best light. A lot of times in the mentorship, when I review people's applications before they submit it, I do a draft review. One of my biggest edits all the time is like, you don't have to go into why last year you didn't sell as much as you thought you would and all of these things. Like, they don't know about that. They don't need to know about it. You're not hiding it. You're just presenting yourself like in a job interview. Like, these are my strengths. These are the things we've done. This is how we think we can build moving forward. And then in submit, reread the questions. There's a toolkit that you use to do your application. And before you submit it, you should reread every question, really make sure, did you answer every part of the question? Just like in those like 5th grade essays that we had to write, or middle school essays. And then make sure to include all the attachments needed. One year, the data I got from the USDA, the statistic was that 32% of applications were denied because they were incomplete. They didn't include one of the attachments, or didn't include, one of the things they asked for. So make sure to do all that. You spent all this time on it. Be really thorough in that submit phase. Those are the 5 phases of our grant writing mentorship. And I just want to tell you about it very quickly because we are going to start it on March 1st. So this is our guided approach to writing a grant yourself. So the farmer, you yourself are writing the application, but we lead you through that process with a guidebook, with live calls, with templates and tools, and with a one-on-one draft review of your application. There are 2 spots, I believe, left right now. It's capped at 10 so that I can do that draft review. Okay, Liz is saying yes too. So for the March to May 2023, it's a program that's open year round, but we do the live program every year when we're actually writing applications. So from March to May 2023 is the one that we're talking about that only has 2 spots left. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can go to our website. If you go to ellenraleigh.com, is where you'll see more information about it, and feel free to reach out after this as well to ask questions about that program. Okay, I'm going to stop talking, and I can stay on a little bit after the hour as well so that we can get to question and answer. I always get a little carried away with the presentation, but please, any questions you have, I believe you can raise your hand, or you can put them in the chat. We can unmute you, however works best for you. There we go. The deadline for submitting the application, thank you, Laura, for your question. So the RFP has not been announced yet, but the kind of words on the street trickling in is that it will probably be due at the beginning of May. So we won't have that date until the USDA actually announces it, but we decided to move ahead with this because that means people are probably going to only have 60 days instead of 90 days to apply. So you should still aim for knowing that it's probably due around the beginning of May. I'm going to go back to the top because I think there were some questions up here as well. Are we getting a copy of the presentation? Yes, Gabriel. There will be a replay sent out as soon as we get it up, so probably tomorrow. And then if you know folks that would want the copy of the replay and it's later in the year or anything, they can always go to ellenraleigh.com/VAPG webinar, and when they sign up, they'll get the replay from whatever the previous one was, and then they'll learn about the live the next time it comes up. If we apply for a planning grant this year, can we apply later for a working capital grant? Darla, I love this question because the answer is yes, and this is what I've done with farms in the past. So like I said, for that over $50,000 ask, depending on what product it is, you either need a feasibility study or a business plan or a marketing plan. And sometimes farms cannot afford to pay for those things and don't feel comfortable doing them themselves, or feel the feasibility study has to be third party. The marketing plan or business plan can be done by yourself, but sometimes, farms don't feel like that's something that they can do without help. So what you can do is apply for a planning grant. You get that planning grant, you create that material through the planning grant, and then you take that business plan, marketing plan, feasibility, what have you, to apply for the larger grant that goes up to $250,000 the following year. So that's a total project cost of $500,000 with a $250,000 coming from the government. Let's see. I understand that the grant can't be used for purchasing equipment, but can purchasing equipment be used as part of the match? No. Even all the things in the match, in your part, and in all, the entire budget has to be made of eligible expenses. So whether the grant is covering it or you are covering it, it has to be an eligible expense. The deadline for submitting the application, we talked about, will be due in the beginning of May, but we won't know until it's officially announced. What percentage of the applications you work on are under 50K? So in the mentorship, there's been one person who's applied for more than 50K. All of the others that I've done have been under 50K. And basically, you can apply for the 50K grant multiple times over the course of your history as a farm, but they have to be either a different product or commodity or a significantly different project. So it's a really great way to use grant funding in a step-by-step approach to growth, but you have to think through, like, what are we applying for now? And then what are we going to apply for later? With that larger ask, you're kind of honing in on one thing that you're going to try to grow in that 3 years, which I work mainly with small and medium-sized farms. And typically what we found is, one, it would be really hard to manage that grant internally, like actually have the operations to do that. And they want to still have multiple things that they're doing, and they would have to limit that in order to apply for the grant for that larger amount. So they can actually instead do, 50,000 for this product line now, and then 50,000 for a different one later, et cetera. We have to grow at least 50% of the commodity being used to make the product. For example, we would need to grow at least 50% of the blackberries, strawberries, cranberries that go into our jams. Yes. With the caveat that I'd say, like, for example, we worked last year with folks who have herbs and are making soaps. They make like 10 different soaps. We applied for the 3 soaps that they are growing the commodity for. So there's some soaps that they purchase the herb and they make the soap, and we just left those out of the application. So in your case, if you're like growing 50% of the blackberries and the strawberries, but you're purchasing all the cranberries, we just wouldn't include cranberry jam. We'd do blackberries and strawberries making jam. If we want to mark our flowers as local, eligible expenses would be promotion and staff making bouquets. So this is the part about local, the little asterisk, is local has to be edible. So flowers are not covered under that local category. The flowers could be applicable if they're grown in a way that enhances their value. So the like organic, sustainably grown flowers, like something like that, is how those would be eligible for the program. And bouquets are not considered a change in physical state. So really the only way that flowers get in are kind of 2 ways. One is selling them, like selling organic flowers, or like sustainably, like some sort of certification around your flowers. Or if you're like drying flowers and making edible rose petals or like making like balms with them or something like that. Could you use the grant to build a place to create value-added meat products like sausages, marinated meats, etc.? No, it's not a equipment grant, which is kind of, or a construction grant, which is what that would cover. Is it 50K total, or is it 50K USDA and 50K match? 50K USDA and 50K match. So the ask, when I say ask, I mean what you're getting from the government, and then the total budget includes both that ask and your match. So if your ask, it's a max of 49,999 to be exact, because it's less than 50,000 is the simplified application. So that would be an ask from the government of 49,999, and then you would match that with 49,999. When submitting the reimbursements, you get $1 for every dollar spent. How do you end up getting the entire grant funding amount? I am not fully answering that question or understanding that question, Michael. So if you want to rewrite it, I might understand it. If you're asking for $49,999, that's how much you get. The entire budget that you'd submit would be worth the 90. I had it. 90. What is 49,999 times 2? I had it and now it's left my brain. Nope. 49,999 times 2. $99,998. So that would be the total budget, and you're going to ask for half of that, and you'd get all half of that. Yay, Sabine, edible flowers. I love them. Yes, if you did little like Tetra packs or something of edible flowers, that also, now it's edible. Would sample packs be eligible? For example, a box with some marketing material and some product. Would the value of the sample product be eligible for the in-kind portion? I feel like this has come up, and the answer, I believe, is no. That it's commodity, it's the value of the commodity that can be included, but not the value of product. I would want you to definitely like check on that with your local USDA RD state rep. And Liz, maybe you can Google that and stick it in the chat of, they're really great and I find this program that the people who are involved in it are very responsive. But I believe that is a no. Yep, Sabine, packaging edible flowers and clamshells, exactly. That would be eligible. So while the grant wouldn't cover the equipment for processing nuts, would it pay for getting the nuts processed by a third party? Yes, it would, which is what it is. So the reason, just in case it helps lessen that sting to know the reason really is in a lot of grants, anything that's a depreciating asset, they don't want to fund. So you purchase equipment or you can't purchase like a van, for example, with this. You can lease. There's some options about leasing. For example, we've gotten cold storage, like one of those, what are they called? The refrigerated units that they can just come and deliver to your farm. We've gotten the lease of that for 3 years, the rental of it covered. But anything that's something you own that's now losing value, they don't typically, in a lot of grants, want to cover the cost of those types of things. Can you use the grant to create and market your own line of sausages, package marinated meats with your own animals? Yes, for sure. The one thing that I'd say is that you do, like I said, you want to have some amount of sales to show. So there's kind of two answers here. If you're asking for more than $50,000, if you haven't been selling the product already for 2 years, then you have to have that third-party feasibility study basically at that stage, they're saying, you're asking for like $150,000 and you've never even made this product yet before. We need to see that somebody else has looked at this and said, yes, we think it's a good idea. We don't just want to hear you saying it's a good idea. We need some other person as well. If you're asking for that simplified application, you don't need to have that full, I'm gonna get out of, you don't need to have that full 2 years, but you do need to have some sales to be able to project off of. So if you've been selling meat already, but you haven't been selling the sausages, and you do a poll of your customers asking, if we had sausages, like, would you buy them? Yes, no, maybe. And then you had some basis for saying, here's our sales. We've done a poll. This is how many people do want it. So we do feel confident that we could sell this much in the first year. Then I would say that's a case for actually writing a grant. If, however, you like have animals and you've never processed them and you've never sold them and you want to just apply for a simplified application without any sort of sales data, that would be a very tricky application to get funded. So I hope that wasn't too complicated of an answer. Would equipment to process nuts be eligible? No, so there's only the case for like small equipment purchases can be eligible, but large equipment purchases are not eligible. And Liz, I always get the specifics. It was 2,000, right? Not 5,000, or was it 5? Oh, it's 5. Okay, thank you. So 5,000. So if it's valued less than 5,000, you can get it. And no, it's not the kind of thing that if it's more, you can say we'll cover it. It's everything has to be an eligible expense. So if it's over $5,000, you can't cover it. The grant can't cover it as part of this budget. Can staff be considered subsidizing a co-packer's sales individual? I'm not sure what that means. So maybe try again with that one. Oh, that came from you, Liz.
Those are some questions asked like early on, and so I just quoted them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that came from Bill.
Okay, Bill, if you would like to try a different way of asking that question, I'm not sure what you mean. Staff is totally staff on the production of the product, not the growing of the commodity, is something that can be covered. And then co-packing fees can be covered, but I'm not sure what you mean by the subsidizing. You're welcome, Jody. And yay, Laura, I'm glad that it was helpful. You mentioned CSA. Can you talk more about that? Sure. Thank you, Liz. We forgot to do that. I think it's okay. So the CSA, because produced in a manner and local are both parts of this grant. So you don't need to be making a finished product. You could be selling, well, you could be selling a finished product through your CSA, or you could be selling organic tomatoes through your CSA, or you could just be selling local conventional tomatoes through your CSA. And all of that would be a project that could be eligible for the grant. So with your CSA, for example, if what you're doing is selling conventional local tomatoes through a CSA, then promoting the CSA, promoting your tomatoes in the CSA, the cost of the boxes, the cost of the portal, whatever you use for people to sign up, the cost of delivery, all that stuff, promotions can get covered. A storefront location to sell the product. No, so it's not a, it can, what should I say? It can cover, it's not going to cover like building out the location or anything like that. It could cover things like signage in that location or a point of sale material, a point of sale thing. It could do some ads and promotion, but again, this is going to be for the product. So it's not going to cover advertising for your store. It would have to advertise your, what's another example so I don't keep using tomato sauce? Your yarn. And then where can you buy the yarn? This store. But the focus of the ad would have to be your yarn, not your store. Just like it couldn't be, the focus couldn't be your farm. I have a co-producer that already has a salesperson selling similar products. Can I subsidize part of their salary to market our new products too? I would say you couldn't subsidize them most likely because they're not, this isn't like a dual, you would apply as your own entity, but you could hire that person for a certain number of hours or pay them as a contractor, but you wouldn't like pay the other company unless like it was a contractor. I hope that makes sense. Like, for example, if it was like a designer that you're working with, like you might actually have the contract with the design firm and you're paying the design firm and the designer is doing the work for you. But I don't consider that subsidizing. Could the grant go towards covering the cost of renting a commercial kitchen to produce certified products? Yes, it can. An important thing to note though is like you are applying for something in the feasibility section. You really have to show that you have what it takes to pull off the project. So if you want to make pickles and you're in California, this is California specific, but if you want to make pickles and you're in California and you're like, I'm going to make it myself, and you don't already have a kitchen, have a cannery license, have you know, the things that you need to actually do that, then this isn't the grant for you yet. And you should get those things in place and apply next year, because you have to show in the feasibility section that you actually have what it takes to pull off the project. They don't want to give you funding and then you can't find a kitchen and your licensing doesn't come through and then the project, you know, doesn't happen, or you're selling the product being made illegally. So you have to have that stuff in place in order to apply. Meet CSA, yes. Can you also add local products from other farms or local bakers and your meat in the CSA? So this is commodity specific and product specific. And in that commodity and product, you have to have produced 50% of the commodity that goes into the product. So it's if your idea is like, I want to use grant funds to like purchase other products and resell them, that's not what this grant is about. This grant is about a commodity and then a product and then a project that increases your revenue and your customer base. Yep, Bill, that's perfect. Contract work for a set percent of hours. That would work great. Can I recover costs already spent this year if I spent before grant is approved? No. So the way that the grant like works when you're actually when you've gotten your grant funded, you spend money and then that's where the 2,000, no, is that 1,000? That's 1,000. Okay, so when you spend money, you basically request for a reimbursement and then they reimburse you. All the requests for reimbursements come with like an invoice. And then if it's over 1,000, Liz, am I right? Over 1,000 or 2, you also have to show proof of payment. 1,000. Okay. And all of the dates, so whether it's an invoice or a proof of payment, those dates have to happen within the grant period, and the grant period starts when you get the approval letter. You actually like you sign the contract with the USDA. Great question, Carrie. I should actually add this to the presentation for next year. Grants are typically awarded in October. So it's a little funky for a lot of folks and their harvest time because they want you to spend some amount of money within the first 90 days. And October is like after a lot of people's peak season, or like right in the middle of it. So it's important when you're applying to think about something like maybe, you know, you might have to already have paid for processing this year, but you can maybe wait to do all the labels if you don't have the cash flow for that yet, or you can start working on that stuff or do a deposit with your co-packer in order to pack the next year. You have to have something that you're actually working on the project within the first 90 days. But it's a little bit of awkward timing for a lot of farmers that it hits in October. Darla, you're welcome. And I think it's great. I love what Darla said is that I'm not sure we're quite ready for this, but I'm thinking next year for sure in the mentor program. So it's awesome to think about like, what could this grant do? What do we need in order to apply? And then give yourself that year to get those things together, because it really, you want to have some amount of sales so that you can show that it is a product that people want, you know, that there's an ability for the reviewers to have have confidence in the project that you're proposing to them. So you want to have some amount of sales. You want to have, they're going to ask for a P&L, for example, within the application. So if you don't have great financial record keeping yet, like sign up for QuickBooks, figure it out, do that this year so that next year you have a P&L to attach to it. It's a great thing to look at, to prepare yourself and give yourself that year to amass what you need in order to then apply later down the road if you're not quite ready for it now. And that looks like all the questions. Yeah, it was just a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. And I wish you all the luck in the growth of your farm. I wish you all the luck in your value-added producer grant, and feel free to reach out with any questions.